Hello everyone, my name is Melissa Hoffbauer and I am a 5th year graduate student in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. And so when asked to talk about 15 months worth of experiences and summarize it all into 5 minutes, it can be a little bit of a daunting task. And I think many of us could talk for much more than 5 minutes. But I was sort of able to, pinpoint what I want to talk about down to something that's really foundational for me. And I'm going to start by talking about what's called the hierarchy of competence. And believe it or not, John doesn't talk a ton of a lot during this process, but this is something that he talked about early on. And so the hierarchy of competence is essentially, it's basically the process by which most of us learn, right? Just to explain it, we start with unconscious incompetence. We don't know that we don't have a skill. Then you move up to where the yellow is, and you can see you go to conscious incompetence. So you realize there's a skill, but you know you're not very good at it. So typically what we sort of do now is work really hard, practice, get better, move up to where you're consciously competent. And being consciously competent, this means, okay, you've got a skill, you can actually execute the skill kind of well now. And over time, it sort of becomes this unconscious competence where then you're doing something and you don't even really realize that you're doing it. It's just second nature. So to put this into context, John wasn't talking about throwing a baseball or riding a bike or anything like that. He was talking more about like personal development, self-awareness, and developing soft skills. And so this was a concept that sort of hit home for me because I hadn't ever really thought of soft skills as something you really work at developing. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But I did a ton of reading and found that a lot of the population actually sort of falls in, when it comes to soft skill development, sort of falls into conscious incompetence range, where you can be self-aware that you do have some weaknesses and things of that sort, but a lot of times we don't take the extra steps and work really hard to improve those skills. And so I realized for myself, I was aware of a lot of my weaknesses, but I wasn't really taking the steps to improve myself. And so for me, the Ethical Leaders in STEM program was the perfect opportunity to spend a year's time, really developing in those ways. And so we were really fortunate in the sense that in the Ethical Leaders in STEM program, we get these fantastic tools, which of course everyone's already sort of mentioned to some level, but we get the opportunity to do these personal assessments. One is a personality assessment, which is the DISC assessment, and then the other one is called an emotional intelligence assessment. And so really with these two tools, I was able to really pinpoint a lot of the weaknesses or softer skills and things that I wanted to work on and make a game plan for myself to a certain level. And so, like with the DISC assessment, I found out I'm an I. You can see in both my work life and my personal life, very far in that corner. And so like Monica spoke about, I found out that perhaps the way I was approaching everybody wasn't perfect. Everyone's a little different. So it's a lot of learning about how do you interact with different people. And this was a tool that helped me do that. And I was cognizant of the fact that I was practicing it because of this hierarchy of competence bit that I learned. And then furthermore, looking at the emotional intelligence model, you can see these 5 different, sort of subcategories here. There can be a lot of weaknesses in there, and I found out there was several places where I needed to really be working. And it was really because of this assessment. It really broke things down for me, and I took it very seriously. And I found the things that I wanted to work at, and I made conscious efforts every day throughout this process to do so. And so, along with my conscious efforts and being put in an atmosphere, with 16 other, 15 other people, 16 total, with 15 other people to really have similar-minded goals, right? We all wanted to develop, we all wanted to get better at things. And so I was able to leverage these tools and these fantastic people to really be able to thrust myself forward. And I think in a year's time that, I don't know if I'm all the way in the green, but I think I've made steps towards the green, and I guess that brings me towards my next steps. A lot of this process for me was largely self-awareness, raising self-awareness. And to me, I guess if I was asked to define leadership, foundation is definitely self-awareness. And what I'm trying to say here is, I think that, I guess I'll backtrack here. What I'm trying to say is that, in the future, I'm trying to get to this unconscious competence stage. And I think that all these tools and my self-awareness and everything has put me in a good position to really thrust myself forward in the next couple of years. And I guess for life, because that's the great thing about this. We've been given all these tools, and they're not limited to a year or 2 years. It's stuff you can take with you forever. And so I guess for some parting words here, one thing is that I do want to thank my cohort for being such a fantastic group and being so influential throughout this process for me. I want to thank Mark and John. They were fantastic, really helpful as well. But for me, a huge part of this program was Kate. Not to dwell on the leadership mentor thing, but Kate was really foundational for me. She we spent so much time talking together, and she helped me really greatly. And I think she was almost quintessential in my development throughout this process, which brings me to my next point. She is the reason that I applied for the leadership mentor position, which I'll be taking over next year. And my hopes are for everyone else that I can be as good of a mentor as Kate was to me. And so with that, that's sort of my next steps, and I'd like to pass it over to Sebastian.